Hi, welcome back to Shrink Happens. Today I want to invite you into something a little different, a therapy session with Big and Natasha. I know it's almost impossible to imagine Big in therapy with his walls, avoidance, and a constant need for control. But let's pretend that after the affair they actually tried to work through it. And in this session we're going to focus on Big. Not to justify his behavior, of course, but to understand what was really going on inside him. Because clearly his cheating has nothing to do with Natasha and her not being good enough. It was about his own unresolved patterns that destroyed their relationship from the inside out. Natasha had it all. Class, elegance, she's just a pure perfection. So why wasn't it enough? And what can her story teach us about love, self-worth, and many invisible emotional traps that many of us fall into without realizing it? Cheating, as painful as it is, often has deep psychological roots. And as women, we often thought if we are beautiful, graceful, calm, then we will finally get the love that we crave and we will never be cheated on or betrayed. But Natasha and Big's story shows us something crucial. Even perfection cannot fix emotional unavailability. Let's start with Big's psychological profile and debunk one of the most common misconceptions. Big isn't really a classical clinical narcissist, even though he often might come across as one. He does definitely have some very prominent characteristics of a narcissist, such as the charm, the emotional unavailability, and a constant need to have everything done on his own terms. However, what is crucial to that story is the fact that Big is a textbook avoidant man. However, his distance and inconsistency don't come from grandiosity, but rather from his fear of closeness. Avoidant people are terrified of losing their independency, and they're also very much afraid of vulnerability. They do need connection, but when someone gets too close, they instantly pull away to regain some of that safety. They try to avoid conflict as much as possible, not because they don't care, but because the closeness and the vulnerability that you can show in a conflict just feels too dangerous to them. Where does this behavior come from? Of course, it has to come from childhood. Let's fantasize for a moment about Big's upbringing. We actually did see his mother in one of the episodes in church, and she looked very elegant, very poised, but emotionally detached, and that's very important. Let's imagine what it might feel like to grow up in that kind of high society family. We can imagine polished dinner tables, strict manners, and just this quiet coldness. We can imagine that family time rarely had that kind of messy human connection. His mother doesn't seem particularly warm or emotionally connected. Instead, she moves through life maintaining a certain image, as if her role matters more than her feelings and the ones who are close to her. When a child grows up with cold and emotionally distant parents who cannot meet their emotional needs, they quickly learn that closeness leads to disappointment. No matter how much I cry, no one comes. So I just have to stop needing. On the outside, the child becomes self-sufficient and independent, but inside they remain deeply disconnected. If you want to understand attachment styles more deeply, beyond the shallow pop psychology explanations that you often see online, then I highly recommend the book called Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller. Despite all the trivial talk about attachment style these days, this topic is actually fundamental to psychology. This theory is rooted in one of the most fundamental psychological experiments of all time, Mary Ainsworth's The Strange Situation Test. In this experiment, the infants were observed as their caregiver left the room and then returned. Researchers paid close attention to how the children reacted when their caregiver left the room, whether they explored the room freely or they felt anxious or avoided contact. These responses revealed 3 primary attachment styles: anxious, avoidant, and secure. And that experiment brilliantly proved that early caregiving shapes our patterns even in adult relationships. Now in modern psychology, they also added disorganized attachment style, or also called anxious avoidant. If you want to learn more about it, actually Carrie from Sex and the City had that one. You can see that in a video of Big and Carrie therapy session that we also have on our channel. But let's go back to Big. His avoidant attachment style, shaped by his early childhood experience, can explain so much in his behavior, from his fear of intimacy to his constant need of independence, and ultimately why he struggled so much to stay fully present in his marriage to Natasha. Let's go back to that moment of Big and his mother at the church. Their interactions seem polite but cold, lacking real emotional intimacy. Even as an adult, Big struggles to fully express himself around her. Remember how he refused to introduce Carrie to his mother when she went to the church and spied on them? Part of it is his avoidant nature, yes, but it also shows that he has that childlike fear of his mother's disapproval, ashamed of choosing a girlfriend that she might judge as inappropriate. And if you look closely, every woman that he chooses to marry resembles his mother in some kind of way. Let's look at his first wife, and then Natasha, and then on his mother again. They are all very high class, elegant, composed, and graceful. So as you can imagine, Natasha fits perfectly in that picture. And that's the key word, picture. Avoidant people don't fall in love with a real person. They fall in love with an idea. They project their fantasy onto someone and they fall in love with the idea that they created in their head. And that's exactly what happened to Natasha. She just happens to be the perfect picture that fits exactly the image of a perfect wife that Big has in his head. Beautiful, elegant. Within 6 months of knowing her, he proposed. Because when you're in love with an idea, it's easy to rush. But then the reality sets in. Real relationships require work, vulnerability, conflict, and compromise. And that's where avoidant people tend to panic, because that's exactly what they want to avoid for as much as they can. So what does Big do? He withdraws. He avoids Natasha, he distances himself, and eventually he cheats. His cheating is nothing but a psychological defense mechanism to gain back the control and run away from Natasha and the real intimacy, because to him it feels suffocating. Of course he doesn't cheat because Carrie is the one and he just suddenly realized it. Of course not. He cheats because at that particular moment Carrie feels safe. She is in another relationship with Aiden and she is not fully available. And that's exactly why Big can desire her safely again. There's emotion and passion, what he needs, but there's no risk of true closeness. He needs control and he confuses this with passion and love, of course, unconsciously. You can see the same pattern when later he fell in love with some actress later on. Again, a pure fantasy. He's only comfortable with loving people that are not fully available, because that keeps him in control. In his marriage with Natasha, he felt completely trapped because he was losing his independence and his autonomy. Cheating became his distorted way to regain control. Another important thing about Big is that he avoids conflict like it's the plague. Remember, he was like this with Carrie. Never direct, always sidestepping around serious conversations, never giving a yes, never giving a no, always in between. Of course, it's very hard to imagine that he was different with Natasha in their marriage. After they got married and problems and friction inevitably occur, I highly doubt that he would be there trying to talk it through or work on their relationships. We don't actually see much of Big and Natasha's marriage, just few fragments. One of them is that scene during the furniture fair where Big and Natasha run into Carrie and Aiden. Big made that sarcastic comment that everything in their house, all the furniture is now beige and he doesn't like it very much. Let's just imagine for a second what probably most likely happened after Big and Natasha's wedding. After the fantasy settled, they became two real people sharing the same space, waking up together, seeing each other in different moods, vulnerable and unpolished. For someone like Big, that's where the trouble starts. He wants connection, but only when it's wrapped in mystery and excitement. Real intimacy, the daily, imperfect kind, feels unbearable. It strips away the fantasy, and with it, the safety of distance. So he begins to withdraw. The romance fades, the conversations grow shorter. Maybe he works late more often, takes more trips. Small ways to regain control and create that distance between him and his wife, because that sense of space is what makes him feel safe. And Natasha, she probably didn't even know that he was unhappy, and that's quite unfair to her. Like that moment about furniture, we can fantasize that he could not even communicate to her that perhaps let's choose another color, let's redecorate. They could have disagreed, argued a little bit, maybe even had a fight. That's a normal act of two people finding their balance, and at least it would have been real. But for Big, even the idea of an honest conversation, of facing friction and working through it together, feels impossible. He doesn't know how to stay present when things get uncomfortable. And soon after, he went looking for another emotional roller coaster, and this time with Carrie. See, for avoidant people, it's very difficult to separate an issue from a person. If something isn't working, or there is a disagreement or misunderstanding, they immediately jump to, she or he is just not my person. This whole thing is not working out for me. Even if it's just a solvable, real life issue. But avoidant people, they will never communicate directly. Instead, they stay silent until they eventually explode, withdraw, or betray. When Big cheats, he's not trying to destroy Natasha, he's trying to escape his own vulnerability. He devalues her, tells himself she's not the one, just to create distance and avoid the unbearable feeling of being seen. As I said at the beginning, Big's choices were not about Natasha, it was purely about him. His issues, his fears, his psychological patterns. That is the key takeaway. If you ever found yourself in a relationship with a man like Big and he betrayed you, you just don't take that personally. Because internalizing it can destroy your sense of self. You just gotta see you did not do anything wrong. And Natasha actually had a very healthy reaction of a very intact, secure person. Yes, she got married to a wrong man, but once she realized who he truly was, she just walked away. That is a behavior of secure, grounded person that is aware of their own self-worth. Natasha actually did not chase Big. Carrie, on the other hand, behaved very differently because she has her own emotional patterns and unresolved issues that she needed to work through. But that's a story for another time. We actually do have a video of Carrie and Big's imaginary therapy session, as well as the videos exploring Charlotte, Miranda, and everyone's favorite Samantha Jones. So please do check them out if you are a fan of the show. This was Shrink Happens, and I'll see you in the next one.